A millionaire woman goes to a restaurant for dinner with her daughter until she sees a poor single father and does the impossible. Before we dive in, let's light up this comment section with hearts from every corner of the world. The maitre d' at Lakeview Grill knew Audrey Callahan by name. He knew she preferred the corner table by the window, the one with the view of the Chicago skyline reflected in Lake Michigan, and that she always ordered the Chilean sea bass without capers, and that she tipped exactly 22%. Never a dollar more, never a dollar less. He knew these things because Audrey Callahan had been coming to this restaurant for 9 years, first with clients, then with her husband, and now, for the first time, alone with her daughter. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, with the practiced warmth of a man who knew the difference between a guest and a regular. "Welcome back. Your usual table?" "Ms. Callahan," she corrected, and the word still felt strange in her mouth, like a coat she had bought in the wrong size and hadn't yet decided whether to return. "And yes. Please." April walked beside her with the solemn importance of a 6-year-old who has been told this is a special dinner and has taken that assignment very seriously. She was wearing the blue velvet dress Audrey had bought for her birthday, and her dark hair was pulled into 2 uneven pigtails that Audrey had attempted 3 times before accepting were as good as they were going to get. Audrey had always been better at managing a Fortune 500 company than she was at managing pigtails. Her ex-husband Daniel had always been better at the pigtails. She didn't let herself think about Daniel. They were seated. April immediately reached for the breadbasket with both hands, and Audrey let her. Because tonight was a night for letting things go. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce was finalized. 3 weeks since Audrey had stood in her attorney's office on the 41st floor of a building she partially owned and watched a notary stamp the papers that ended 12 years of marriage. She had not cried then. She had shaken hands, thanked everyone in the room with the efficient courtesy she applied to all professional interactions, and gone directly back to her office, where she had proceeded to crush the third-quarter earnings projections for Callahan Technologies by a margin that made her CFO audibly gasp. She had not cried until 4 days later in the shower where April wouldn't hear her. "Mommy," April said, holding a piece of bread and staring out the window with the gravity of a philosopher. "Why is that man sitting on the ground?" Audrey turned. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, beyond the golden light of the restaurant and the polished brass of the entrance, she could see the sidewalk. November in Chicago had stripped the last leaves from the trees along Michigan Avenue, and the evening air had that particular quality it got in the weeks before Thanksgiving. Dry and cold, and somehow very still, as though the city itself was holding its breath before the chaos of the holidays. And there, on the bottom step of the restaurant's entrance stairs, sat a man. He was perhaps 35, and he had the kind of face that might have been described as handsome under different circumstances. Strong jaw, dark eyes, the shadow of several days without a razor. He wore a gray jacket that was too thin for the weather and jeans that had been mended at one knee with stitches that were careful and even. The work of someone who took pride in small things. Beside him, holding his hand with both of her small ones, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and a yellow knit hat pulled down over her ears, and she was watching the people who walked past with the patient. Wondering attention of a child who has not yet learned to stop looking at the world. The man held a small cardboard sign. From inside the restaurant, Audrey couldn't read what it said, but she watched him hold it out toward a passing couple in expensive coats, and she watched them walk past without slowing. And she watched the man lower the sign and look at his daughter and smile. A small, private, effortful smile that cost him something. And she felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't immediately name. "He's asking people for help," Audrey said. "Why?" "Because he needs it. Why doesn't someone help him?" Audrey looked around the restaurant. At the tables full of people who were looking at their menus, their phones, their dinner companions. At the window, through which the man and his daughter were fully visible to anyone who cared to look. At the warmth and the light, and the $40 appetizers and the Chilean sea bass that was already being prepared in the kitchen. For a woman who had spent more on her daughter's velvet dress than that man had probably earned in the last month. "I don't know," she said. And then, because she was Audrey Callahan and she had not built a $300 million company by watching problems and doing nothing about them, she put her napkin on the table and stood up. "Where are you going?" April asked, reaching for more bread. "I'll be right back." She walked through the restaurant with the same composure she brought to board meetings, chin level, pace measured, nothing in her expression suggesting that her heart was doing something unusual. The maitre d' looked up as she approached, and she shook her head slightly to indicate she didn't need assistance. She pushed open the brass door and stepped out into the cold. Up close, the sign read, "Please, anything helps. God bless." The man looked up. He had the expression of someone who has been looked through so many times that being actually seen causes a moment of genuine disorientation. His daughter looked up too, and her eyes went immediately to Audrey's coat, a camel cashmere that cost more than most people's monthly rent, with the uncomplicated curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Hello," Audrey said. "Evening," he said. His voice was quiet and even. Not ashamed, not hopeful, not any of the things she might have expected. Just present. "I'm Audrey. My daughter and I are having dinner inside. I'd like you to join us if you're willing." He looked at her for a long moment. People continued to pass on the sidewalk, a river of coats and purpose parting around the three of them without acknowledging them. "We're fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm asking anyway." Another pause. The little girl had not let go of his hand, but she was now studying Audrey with an expression of intense, open analysis. Then she tugged her father's sleeve and whispered something Audrey couldn't hear, and something shifted in the man's face, a brief softening around the eyes, there and gone in an instant. "Anthony," he said finally. "Anthony Reyes. This is Aurora." "Hello, Aurora," Audrey said. Aurora considered her solemnly. "You have nice shoes," she said. "Thank you. Will you come have dinner with us?" Anthony Reyes stood up slowly, and she saw then how tall he was, and how the thinness of his jacket sat across shoulders that were built for carrying things, and she thought, this is a man who has been carrying things a long time. "We don't need charity," he said quietly. "It's dinner," she said. "My daughter is 6 years old and needs someone to talk to about something other than the divorce. You'd actually be doing me a favor." He looked at her. She met his gaze without flinching, because Audrey Callahan had never flinched at a negotiation in her life. Something decided itself in his expression. "All right," he said. She held the door open. Anthony Reyes, with his cardboard sign folded and tucked under one arm, and his daughter's hand held firmly in his, walked into Lakeview Grill. The maitre d's expression did not change because he was a professional. But Audrey caught the micro-hesitation, the half-second recalibration, and she gave him a look that communicated very clearly that this was exactly what she intended, and that there'd be no further recalibrations. They were brought to her corner table, where April had finished the entire breadbasket and was now drawing faces on her napkin with a crayon she had produced from somewhere. "April," Audrey said, "this is Anthony and Aurora. They're going to have dinner with us." April looked at Aurora. Aurora looked at April. There was a moment of the kind of serious mutual assessment that only small children and cats are capable of conducting with complete, wholly unself-conscious honesty. Then April pushed the crayon across the table. "You can draw too," she said, "if you want." And Aurora sat down, picked up the crayon, and began to draw. Audrey looked at Anthony. He was looking at his daughter with that same private, costly smile she had seen through the window. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Audrey Callahan felt something other than the specific hollow weight of being newly alone. She picked up her menu. "The sea base is excellent," she said. He looked at the menu. She watched him locate the prices, and she watched the thing that happened in his jaw, and she said before he could speak, "Please, order whatever you like. Both of you." He was quiet for a moment. "The sea bass sounds good," he said. The children talked about crayons for 20 minutes. This was not something Audrey had anticipated, though she supposed she should have. Aurora, as it turned out, had very specific opinions about colors. Red was the best color for drawing fire, which was the most important thing to be able to draw. Blue was for water and sky and some kinds of sadness. Yellow was only useful if you were drawing a sun or a banana or a specific kind of happiness. Green was acceptable but not exciting. Purple was the most complicated color because it could be royal or sad or magical depending on what you were drawing. And you had to be careful with it. April listened to all of this with the focused intensity she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, which included this, and dinosaurs, and the question of whether mermaids were mammals. "What about orange?" April asked. Aurora thought about it carefully. "Orange is for fire too," she said, "but also for autumn, and for feeling brave." "I like orange," April said. "Me too," said Aurora. Anthony watched his daughter talk, and something in him was so visibly, quietly grateful that Audrey had to look away, because it felt like witnessing something private. They had ordered. The food had come. Anthony had eaten his sea bass with the careful, deliberate pace of a man rationing something, and Audrey had understood without asking that this was not a habit, just survival mechanics that had become habit. Aurora had ordered the children's pasta. After a long and serious negotiation with her father conducted in whispers, and had eaten perhaps half of it before becoming more interested in the drawing project she and April had initiated on the paper tablecloth. "How old is she?" Audrey asked, nodding toward Aurora. 5, Anthony said. "Just turned 5 in September. April is 6, November birthday." A pause. "She starts first grade in January. Aurora's in kindergarten." Something moved across his face. "She was." Audrey waited. Anthony looked at his wine glass. "Water?" She noticed not wine, though she had ordered a bottle for the table, and then at the window and then at her with the expression of a man deciding how honest to be with a stranger who has been inexplicably kind. "We moved here 3 weeks ago," he said. "From Cincinnati. I had a job lined up. Construction foreman. It was supposed to start December 1st. The company went under 2 weeks before I got here." A brief, humorless exhale. "Everything I had went into the move. Security deposit, first month. Job didn't exist anymore by the time I got here." "Where are you staying?" "We have a room." He said it in a way that closed the subject with dignity. Not defensiveness, just the drawing of a line around what he would and would not discuss. Audrey respected lines. She drew them herself constantly. "Do you have family here? In Chicago?" "My sister." He paused. "We're not in contact." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's complicated." She nodded. She understood complicated. 12 years of complicated had been stamped and filed in her attorney's office 3 weeks ago. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and you don't have to answer." He met her eyes. "All right. What's your background?" "Beyond construction." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Maybe. Or the particular wariness of someone who has been asked to perform hope before and found the performance exhausting. 10 years in construction management, he said slowly. "I have a project management certification. I ran crews up to 40 people. Before that, 2 years in the Army. Engineering battalion. You're organized?" "I was." "Why was?" He looked at Aurora, who was teaching April an extremely elaborate system for drawing clouds that apparently involved at least 4 distinct stroke types. "Her mother died," he said quietly. 18 months ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 32. He picked up his water glass. "After that, I had some time where I wasn't much of anything to anyone except her." The table was quiet except for the murmur of the restaurant around them and the soft, intent sound of 2 children drawing clouds. Audrey thought about the bathroom at the back of the restaurant, where she had cried 3 weeks ago while April knocked on the door. She thought about the very precise difference between losing a marriage and losing a person, and she was suddenly, acutely ashamed of a comparison she had not quite made, but had been circling for weeks. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "Thank you." Simply. Without performance. She looked at him. He was looking at Aurora again with that particular expression she kept catching on his face. The look of a man who has decided that everything else can burn, as long as that one thing is okay. Audrey had built a company from 23 employees to 1,200. She had negotiated contracts with Fortune 100 corporations. She had sat across tables from men who had made it their business to underestimate her, and had systematically, pleasurably dismantled every assumption they walked in with. She was not impulsive, She was not sentimental in professional contexts. She believed in data, in process, in the disciplined application of resources toward strategic outcomes. She was also, in this moment, absolutely certain of something she had not been certain of anything in 3 weeks. "I have an opening," she said. He looked at her. "Project manager, Callahan Technologies. We're mid-construction on a new facility in the West Loop. 40,000 square feet. We're 9 weeks behind schedule because our last PM left for Seattle without notice in September. I need someone who can read a construction timeline and manage 40 people and not fall apart under pressure." She picked up her water glass. "The salary is $82,000 to start. Benefits begin day 1. There's a childcare partnership with a facility 2 blocks from the office." Anthony Reyes was very still. "You don't know me," he said. "I know you sat outside in November asking strangers for food and haven't once looked sorry for yourself. I know you spent your last money moving to a city for a job, and when the job disappeared, you didn't disappear. I know your daughter has the best manners of any 5-year-old I've ever met, and children learn manners from people who have them." She set down her glass. "I'm a good judge of character. It's the primary competency that built my company. And I'm offering you a job." The silence stretched. Aurora had moved on from clouds to what appeared to be a very ambitious rendering of a dragon. April was contributing what she described with some authority as the fire. "Why?" Anthony said. "Because I have a problem and you're the solution." A pause. "And because your daughter told you to come inside. I watched her, and she was right." Something happened in Anthony Reyes's face then, a slow, profound unraveling, like watching a knot release. And he looked down at the table, and his jaw was tight. And for one moment he was very much a man who had been underwater for 18 months and had just been offered something to hold on to. "I'd need references," he said, when he looked up. His voice was steady. "Of course. And I'd need to understand the full scope before I agreed to anything. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll have HR send the formal materials tonight." She slid a business card across the table. "My assistant's number is on the back. If you have questions before Monday, call her." He picked up the card and looked at it. "Audrey Callahan," he said. "Yes." "Callahan Technologies." "Yes." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between disbelief and a very careful, very controlled form of hope. "I've heard of you. Most people have. You're—" He stopped, reconsidered. "The company is publicly traded." "Yes? You negotiated the Meridian acquisition last year." "I did. That was in every business publication in the country. It was a significant acquisition." He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him recalibrating, reassembling the picture of what this dinner was and what it meant with this new information layered over the old. She watched him do it with the quiet efficiency of someone who is very good at rapid assessment and was only now, under the specific weight of hope, finding it difficult. "Why were you crying?" he said. She stopped. "When you came outside," he said quietly. "Your eyes. You'd been crying." She looked at him. He met her gaze without apology, without cruelty, just honest, steady attention. "Divorce," she said. He nodded. "Recent?" 3 weeks. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, and heard her own words played back to her, and felt something almost like a smile at the back of her throat. "It's complicated." He looked at her for a long moment and then, for the first time, he smiled. Not the private, costly smile she'd seen through the glass, but something more open, something that reached his eyes and changed the whole geometry of his face, and Audrey Callahan, CEO of a $300 million company, felt the specific sensation of being caught off guard. "All right," Anthony Reyes said. It was not entirely clear in that moment which question he was answering. The night after the dinner at Lakeview Grill, Audrey could not sleep. This was not unusual. Sleep had been loosely cooperative at best for the past 3 weeks, arriving late and leaving early and frequently not showing up at all, which was why she had developed the habit of being at her desk by 5:30 in the morning. A habit her executive assistant Priya had stopped commenting on, because she had learned that comments about it only produced responses that were technically polite and fundamentally discouraging. But this was a different kind of not sleeping. The previous weeks had been the insomnia of grief, or whatever it was that was happening. The thing she refused to call grief because grief implied loss, and she had told herself repeatedly that ending a marriage that had been quietly dying for 4 years was not a loss but a correction. A deliberate and necessary correction. A pruning. She was very good at pruning. This was not the insomnia of grief. This was something more like the particular alert wakefulness that preceded a large acquisition. The sense of having set something in motion that could not be unmotioned, and that would require very careful management from this point forward. She sat at her kitchen island at 3 a.m. with a cup of chamomile tea she wasn't drinking, and her laptop open to Anthony Reyes's employment application, which Priya had sent over at 11 p.m. along with a note that said, "I found him. Army service record is public. I'll have a full background report by 6 a.m. Get some sleep." She hadn't gotten any sleep, but she had read the application 3 times. Anthony Marcus Reyes, 35 years old. Born in San Antonio, Texas. Army Corps of Engineers 2009 to 2011 honorable discharge. Bachelor of Science in Construction Management from the University of Cincinnati. Completed part-time while working full-time. Graduated 2015. 6 years with Martinez Construction in Cincinnati. Started as assistant foreman. Promoted to senior project manager in 2018. Reference, Carlos Martinez, company owner. Reference, Brent Holloway, architect, 4 joint projects over 3 years. His wife's name had been Isabel. She had been a pediatric nurse. She had died in April of the previous year, 17 months ago at 32 years old, leaving a 4-year-old daughter and a husband who had, by his own account, spent some time afterward not being much of anything to anyone. Audrey thought about being 32 and dying, and leaving a 4-year-old. She thought about what it would mean, as a parent, to be dying and have to think, who will manage the pigtails? She closed the laptop and looked at the kitchen ceiling for a while. The dinner had lasted 2.5 hours. April and Aurora had redesigned the entire paper tablecloth by the end, covering it in an elaborate collaborative mythology that involved dragons, a castle made of clouds, 3 mermaids, one of whom had a small crown because she was, April had explained, the president of the ocean, and what Aurora had described very seriously as the bravest horse in the whole world. April had announced at the end of dinner that Aurora was her best friend, a declaration she had made with complete finality, as though this was simply a fact that had been established and would not benefit from further discussion. Aurora had considered this for a moment and then said, "Okay." Anthony had looked at Audrey over their daughters' heads, and the look had contained something. She was still trying to precisely identify what. That was not gratitude. Or not only gratitude, but something more complicated and more careful. When they left, he had shaken her hand. It was a firm, brief, professional handshake, the kind that is practiced and means exactly what it says. And she had found it oddly grounding. "Monday," she had said. "Monday," he had agreed. She had watched them walk out of the restaurant and down the sidewalk, and she had stood at the window in her cashmere coat and watched until they turned a corner. And then she had sat back down at the table with April, who had taken the paper tablecloth and was attempting to fold it into a shape that could fit in her coat pocket. "I like Aurora," April said. "I know. Is she going to come back?" Audrey had thought about Monday morning, and about the construction project 9 weeks behind schedule, and about the precise risk calculus of what she had just done, hiring a man she met on the street 2 hours earlier based on nothing more than a firm handshake, a military record, a dead wife, and the recommendation of a 5-year-old. "Yes," she said. Now she got up from the kitchen island and carried her cold tea to the sink and poured it out. The city was quiet outside the windows of her penthouse, or as quiet as Chicago ever got. A low, continuous thrum. The distant sound of a truck somewhere on Michigan Avenue, the subtle ambient glow of a city that never quite went dark. Her phone lit up with a text. "Priya. Background report coming in early. Also, FYI, Carlos Martinez already called you back. Says, and I quote, 'Anthony Reyes is the best project manager I've ever had, and if you don't hire him, I'll be calling you to explain why that was a mistake. I'm going back to sleep. Audrey smiled at her phone. It was the first time she had smiled in 3 weeks at something that was not the product of effort. She set the phone down and looked out at the city. She thought about a man on a sidewalk who had said we're fine without self-pity or performance, just as a statement of fact from someone who needed it to be true. She thought about the sign folded under his arm when he walked through the door of the restaurant with his daughter's hand in his, and the way he had looked at the menu prices with the practiced, invisible recalibration of someone who had gotten very good at wanting less than they had. She thought about the moment at the end of the dinner when Aurora had climbed onto her chair to hug April goodbye, and how Anthony had stood and watched his daughter and looked exactly the way you look when you have decided that a single person is the reason you keep getting up in the morning. Audrey Callahan knew what that looked like. She looked at April that way every day. She had built her company because she was strategic and disciplined, someone who could identify value where others saw risk and act before the window closed. She was going to hire Anthony Reyes because he was qualified, because her construction project was 9 weeks behind schedule, and because Carlos Martinez thought he was the best. That was the reason. She went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the city and thought about a smile that had changed the geometry of a face. And she was awake for another hour and a half. Monday morning came the way Monday mornings always did at Callahan Technologies, with controlled intensity, the particular focused energy of a well-run organization that had learned to move like its founder, which was to say purposefully and without wasted motion. By 8:45, Priya had cleared 40 minutes from Audrey's calendar between 9 and 10, had arranged for a visitor's badge to be waiting at reception, and had confirmed that the HR materials had been received and reviewed by someone named Anthony Reyes at 7:23 that morning. At 9:02, Anthony walked through the glass doors of the 38th floor. He was wearing a suit. It was not an expensive suit, but it was clean and well-pressed, and it fit him properly, which Audrey had learned long ago was the more important criterion. He had shaved. He carried a folder that turned out to contain printed copies of both his references and 3 construction project summaries. And when Audrey extended her hand, he shook it with the same firm, brief professionalism as Friday night, as though the context had changed, but the terms of engagement had not. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He looked around the office with the specific, unhurried attention of a man assessing a new space. Not impressed. Not indifferent. Just gathering information. "Nice view. It helps with the decisions." She led him to the conference room. Priya appeared with 2 coffees and disappeared with the seamless efficiency that made her, in Audrey's private assessment, the actual operational backbone of the company. "I read the full project brief," Anthony said, opening his folder. "Your facility timeline has 3 compounding delays: subcontractor scheduling, a permit issue with the city that isn't resolved yet, and what looks like a communication breakdown between your architect's office and the site foreman." He looked up. "The permit issue is the critical path. Everything else adjusts around it. What's the current status?" Audrey felt something very specific happen in her chest. She had sat across from many people over the years, and the ones who arrived having already identified the critical path were the ones she immediately knew she was dealing with seriously. "The permit is with the city's structural review office," she said. "It's been there for 3 weeks. My current project coordinator has been waiting for their call." Anthony made a note on his folder. "Have you tried Alderman Caruso's office?" he said. "I'm sorry?" "Alderman Caruso, West Loop Ward. His office has a liaison specifically for expediting commercial construction permits that are in structural review. Most coordinators don't know about it." He looked up. "I had a project in the West Loop in 2019. Same situation. Caruso's office got us a hearing date in 8 days." Audrey looked at him. "In 9 years, 3 project managers, and 24 months of construction on various facilities. Not one person had mentioned Alderman Caruso." "Hire me," he said, "and I'll have a hearing scheduled by Wednesday." She looked at him across the conference table. This man she had found on a sidewalk 4 days ago with a cardboard sign and a daughter who had opinions about the emotional properties of the color orange. And she thought, "I already decided this. I decided this Friday night." "You're hired," she said. He exhaled, just slightly, just once, and picked up his pen. And Audrey Callahan thought, I wonder if he knows that wasn't actually the most significant thing decided at this table. But she was getting ahead of herself. That was something she rarely did. She pushed the HR forms across the table. Let's talk about the timeline, she said. There was one thing, though, that she would not discover until later. Much later, when the construction project was nearly finished, and the nights had grown shorter, and everything between them had become something she no longer knew quite how to categorize. One thing she would not discover until it was almost too late to matter. Anthony Reyes had a sister in Chicago. He had said they weren't in contact. He had said it carefully with the practiced neutrality of someone who has found the language that closes a subject, and she had respected it, as she respected all lines drawn with dignity. But the sister existed, and she knew about Aurora, and she had been making calls. Not to Anthony, to Audrey's ex-husband. If this story is moving you, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling us about someone who changed your life when they least expected to. Now let's get back to Audrey and Anthony. The construction site in the West Loop smelled like raw concrete and ambition, which were, in Audrey's experience, essentially the same thing. She arrived at 7:45 on Anthony's third Wednesday, 15 minutes before the scheduled walkthrough, because she had always believed that the person who arrives first to a site sets the terms of every conversation that follows. She wore site boots, steel-toed, worn at the heels, and a hard hat that had her name stenciled on the back in block letters. The foreman, a broad man named Denny Kowalski, who had been running crews in Chicago for 22 years, met her at the gate with the specific expression he always wore when the boss showed up unannounced. Carefully neutral, vaguely defensive, professionally alert. "Miss Callahan," he said. "Morning, Denny. Where's Reyes?" Denny tilted his head toward the far end of the site, where the interior framing for the west wing was still being erected. "Been here since 6 this morning," he said with something in his voice that might have been respect or might have been surprise, and which in either case told Audrey something useful. She found Anthony on the second floor, standing on a temporary platform with a set of drawings spread across a sawhorse. He was talking to 2 subcontractors in the methodical, specific language of someone who has learned that construction communication requires the elimination of all ambiguity. He looked up when she appeared at the top of the stairs, registered her presence without breaking his sentence, finished the thought, sent the contractors off with clear assignments, and then turned to her. "You're early," he said. "You're earlier. I wanted to walk the west wing before the crew got started. There's a framing variance on the 3rd floor that the drawings don't account for. We're going to lose 2 inches of clearance on the mechanical room access unless we adjust the stud spacing in this section." He showed her on the drawings, pointing to the relevant section with the efficiency of a man who has already solved the problem and is now simply communicating the solution. "I've flagged it for the architect. They're sending someone over at 10. Audrey looked at the drawings. She understood them well enough to follow his reasoning, and his reasoning was correct. "How did you find it?" "Walked the floor with a tape measure at 6 this morning." He said it without emphasis, as though this were an obvious thing to do, which for him it apparently was. She looked at him for a moment. 3 weeks. He had been working at Callahan Technologies for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks he had secured the city permit hearing. It had been scheduled within 9 days, exactly as he'd promised. Resolved a subcontractor dispute that had been festering since September. Restructured the project timeline into something Audrey's architect had described, with visible relief, as actually achievable, and discovered a framing variance on the 3rd floor at 6 in the morning, with a tape measure before anyone else had arrived. She was not a woman who was frequently surprised by people. She had hired well for 15 years, and she had learned to calibrate expectations correctly so that reality could meet them, rather than miss them in either direction. Anthony Reyes was exceeding her expectations, and she had set them high. "The permit hearing," she said. "You should know. They expedited the structural review. We have approval. As of yesterday afternoon." Something happened in his face. It was not a large thing. A brief, involuntary shift around the eyes, the controlled expression of a man who feels more than he displays. "Good," he said. "It moves us up 12 days. I know. I've already adjusted the critical path. He showed her on the timeline he'd developed, a revised Gantt chart that distributed the recovered time across 3 bottleneck phases. It was elegant and pragmatic, and had clearly been prepared before he knew about the approval, which meant he'd been ready for the news before it arrived. She thought, he prepared for good news the way most people only prepare for bad. She thought, when did I last do that? April keeps asking about Aurora, she said. She had not planned to say this. The words arrived with the slightly surprised quality of things she hadn't authorized. Anthony looked up from the Gantt chart. His expression shifted. Not much, but enough. Aurora talks about April every day, he said. She's been very firm that April is her best friend. The designation appears to be permanent. April's position is the same. A pause. She made a drawing of the 2 of them last week. It's on our refrigerator. Aurora is depicted with a yellow hat. She wears that hat everywhere. Something warm moved through his voice there and gone, professional composure reasserting itself with the ease of long practice. It was Isabel's, her mother's. Audrey was quiet for a moment. She keeps her close, Anthony said. Aurora does. She keeps things close. The sight noise continued around them, the sound of work proceeding, of 40 people moving toward an outcome. And Audrey thought about a 5-year-old in a yellow knit hat on a November sidewalk, holding her father's hand while the city moved past without seeing them, and she thought about what it meant to keep something close that you were terrified to lose. There's something I should tell you, Anthony said. She waited. My sister. He said it carefully, looking at the drawings rather than at her. I told you we weren't in contact, that's still true, but I found out last week that she made contact with someone connected to your situation. Audrey felt something shift in her chest. What situation? Your divorce. He looked at her then, directly, with the steady honesty that she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he found difficult. My sister's name is Camille Reyes. She lives in Lincoln Park. She knows your ex-husband. I don't know how exactly. I think through a professional connection somewhere. I found out because she called me. She wanted me to quit. The sight noise continued. 40 people building something. Quit, Audrey said. She said it was going to look wrong, that people would talk. A woman going through a divorce hires a man she found on the street. She used those exact words. She was worried about my reputation. Or she said she was. Was that all she said? Something moved across his face. She said you had a pattern of making decisions about people you felt sorry for. That it was a kind of, she used the word project. She said I should think about whether I wanted to be someone's project. The word landed in the particular way that words land when they contain exactly enough truth to do maximum damage. Audrey was quiet. She was very good at being quiet when it was the strategic choice. What did you tell her? She said. I told her I'd worked for 3 weeks and been treated with complete professional respect, and that my decisions about my own employment were not her business. A pause. I also told her that whatever she thought she was protecting me from, she should stop, and that she should not contact anyone connected to my work again. Has she? I don't know. He met her eyes. I thought you should know it happened, whatever it means for whatever else it means. Audrey looked at the revised Gantt chart. She looked at the framing drawings. She looked at this man who had been on a sidewalk 5 weeks ago and was now standing on the 2nd floor of her construction project at 7:45 in the morning, having already solved a problem no one else had found, telling her a thing he didn't have to tell her because he had decided it was the right thing to do. Thank you, she said. I'm not telling you to create an obligation, he said, with the precision of someone who has thought about how this might be read. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I understand the difference, she said. Thank you. He nodded, turned back to the drawings. Work to be done. She thought, I wonder if Camille Reyes told Daniel what she thought I was. She thought, I wonder if Daniel already knew. There was a phone call she was going to need to make to her attorney. But first there was a construction site walkthrough, and a framing variance on the 3rd floor, and 12 recovered days that needed to be managed well. She put on her hard hat. Walk me through the west wing, she said. and Anthony Reyes, without any ceremony, did. He called from Daniel's attorney arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days before Christmas at 4:17 in the afternoon. Audrey was in a meeting when it came through. Her CFO, 2 board members, and a conversation about the Q4 projections that was going well, but not so well that she couldn't step out for 7 minutes when Priya appeared at the conference room door with the expression that meant something had arrived that couldn't wait. She took the call in the hallway. "Ms. Callahan." It was Marcus Webb, Daniel's attorney, competent and slightly oleaginous in the way of lawyers who have spent too long watching people negotiate the ruins of things once built together. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Callahan regarding some concerns that have arisen." "Concerns?" she said. "Regarding the custody arrangement for April." Audrey felt every cell in her body go absolutely still. "Specifically," Webb continued, in the measured cadence of a man reading from a prepared script, "Mr. Callahan has become aware of a relationship, let's call it, between yourself and an employee. He believes this relationship may represent a concern with respect to April's well-being, given the circumstances under which this individual was engaged." The hallway was quiet. Through the conference room glass, she could see her CFO gesturing at a spreadsheet. The city hummed below the windows. Everything was very normal and very far away. "I'd like to understand the nature of these concerns," she said. Her voice was completely level. She had built 1,200 people on the foundation of that voice, and she was not going to let Marcus Webb hear what was happening beneath it. "Mr. Callahan is concerned that April has been introduced to a man whose background and circumstances. My employee's background includes 10 years of construction management, an engineering degree, and an honorable discharge from the Army," she said. "His circumstances include widowhood, single parenthood, and an impressive professional record. April has met him twice in professional contexts. If your client has concerns about child welfare, I'm happy to have my attorney respond in writing with the relevant documentation." A brief pause. "Mr. Callahan is also concerned about the nature of the relationship between—" "There is no relationship," she said. The words felt strange in a way she would not examine until later. She filed it away. Her attorney was waiting. "Mr. Reyes is my project manager. He is a professional colleague. If your client wishes to revisit custody arrangements based on the professional relationships of his ex-wife, I would strongly recommend he consult with you about the advisability of that strategy before proceeding." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll relay your response," Webb said. "Please do." She ended the call. She stood in the hallway for 30 seconds. Then she sent a text to Eleanor Park. "Daniel's team is making custody noises. Call me when you're free. Not urgent." She added the last 2 words because they were not true and Eleanor would know it. And Eleanor knowing it was sufficient. She went back into the meeting. Her CFO was still gesturing at spreadsheets. She picked up where she'd left off. She did not tell Anthony that day, or the next. She told him on Thursday, having spent 2 days deciding whether it was her information to share. She concluded it was. It affected him. Camille had provided the ammunition and she had decided on that construction site to be honest with this man and didn't intend to start making exceptions. She told him in the conference room at 7 in the morning, with 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall, because the office was quiet that early and there was no audience for something that didn't need one. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup, thinking through it all with the careful attention he brought to construction problems, following implications, checking load-bearing points, testing for weaknesses. "He's not going to pursue it," Anthony said finally. "My attorney thinks the same. It's a pressure move. He wants to renegotiate something in the settlement, and this is leverage." "What does he want to renegotiate?" "A property in Scottsdale that we apparently both remembered differently." A brief pause. "It's not about April." "Are you sure?" She looked at him. "No, I'm not sure of anything where April is concerned, that's the point." She set down her coffee. "I'm telling you, because you have a right to know that your sister's call had consequences. And because," she stopped. She reorganized the sentence. "Reorganized. And because if this becomes a formal proceeding, your name may come up. You should be prepared for that." He was quiet again. Then, "My sister called him." "I believe so, yes." Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Not the controlled grief, not the professional composure, but something harder and more complicated. He set down his cup with the careful deliberateness of someone managing an impulse. "She has no right," he said quietly. "I know. She doesn't know anything about my life. She doesn't know Aurora. She chose. Years ago she chose." He stopped, pressed his mouth together, looked at the window. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I'm not apologizing for being angry. I'm apologizing for—" He paused, recalibrated. "I'm angry on your behalf, not just mine. I wanted to be clear about that." Audrey looked at him for a long moment. Outside the windows, Chicago was beginning its morning, the city assembling itself for another day. The familiar hum rising in waves from the streets below. "My ex-husband," she said slowly, "is a good man who became someone I didn't recognize because we wanted different things, and neither of us was willing to say so until it was too late. He's not doing this to hurt me. He's doing this because he's scared and doesn't know how to ask for what he actually wants, which is more time with April." She looked at her coffee. "I knew that by the end of our second year of marriage, and I never said it out loud until right now." Anthony was watching her. "Your sister," she said, "is frightened of something. I don't know what. But people who make calls like that are usually frightened. She thinks I'm going to disappear again," he said quietly. "The way I did after Isabel. She thinks she's trying to protect Aurora from me losing myself again." A long silence. "She's not wrong that it happened. She's wrong about what's preventing it from happening now." Audrey waited. "Aurora," he said. "Aurora is what's preventing it. She was always what was preventing it. I just couldn't see it for a while." He looked up. His eyes were steady and dark and very direct. "And the job. What you gave me. It gave me somewhere to put the part of me that needed to be useful. I don't know if I've said that. You didn't need to say it. I'm saying it anyway." He picked up his coffee. "Because you deserve to hear it." The sentence landed quietly and then sat between them in the morning light of the empty conference room, and Audrey Callahan, who had been managing the strategic implications of human emotion for 15 years, and had believed herself quite good at it, found that she had no strategy for this one. "I'm going to call Camille," he said. "Today. I think it's time we—" He stopped. "I think there are things that need to be said. For Aurora's sake. She should know her aunt." "Yes," Audrey said. "And for mine." He looked at the window again. "I've been carrying that one a long time, too." She said nothing. She thought about what it cost to put down the things you'd been carrying, and whether the relief was immediate or whether you stood for a moment in the strange lightness of it, not quite sure what your arms were for. The building had been in operation for 42 minutes. People were beginning to arrive below them. "We have a project review at 9, Anthony said, that particular shift in register returning to professional ground, the way he always held things in their proper compartments. The mechanical contractor has questions about the third-floor access." "I'll be there," she said. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They sat for a moment in the ordinary, breathing quiet of two people who had said something true, and were not yet sure what came next, but were not afraid of the not knowing. And then the day began, as days do, with small practical things that could be addressed one at a time. There was one thing she had not told him. One thing she had not found the language for, sitting in that conference room with the Chicago morning assembling itself outside, and his eyes steady and dark across the table. She had not told him that when Webb said the word relationship, her first instinct, and before any legal calculation, before any professional composure, had been something closer to recognition than denial. She drove home through the early December dark and thought about the difference between what was true and what was ready to be said, and whether those two things ever arrived together. April was asleep when she got home. She stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a long time, watching her breathe, one arm thrown over the drawing she'd brought to bed, the one of her and Aurora, both of them with crowns, the horse running alongside an orange for bravery. She thought, whatever comes next, this part is simple. She thought, protect this. Everything else is negotiable. Friends, if this story has touched something in you, give it a like, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And now, this is the chapter everything has been building toward. The custody mediation was scheduled for January 14th, which was 13 days after the construction project completed ahead of schedule, 6 weeks after the conference room conversation, and approximately 4 months after Audrey Callahan had walked out of a restaurant and held a door open for a stranger. Eleanor Park, Audrey's attorney of 9 years, had described Daniel's custody petition as thin as cigarette paper. The Scottsdale property dispute had been resolved 2 weeks earlier. The leverage was gone. What remained was a proceeding Eleanor believed would result in a modified agreement giving Daniel 3 additional weekends per year. He's going to bring up Mr. Reyes, Eleanor said at their pre-mediation meeting on January 13th. I know. My advice is simple acknowledgement. Professional colleague. No relationship. Move on. Audrey looked at her. Eleanor looked back. Is there something I should know? Eleanor said, with the careful neutrality of a woman who has learned to ask questions whose answers she is already half certain of. He's a professional colleague, Audrey said. Audrey. He is a professional colleague, she said again, and also someone who matters to me and to April. Those two things can be simultaneously true. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Has anything happened between you? No. Do you want something to happen? Audrey had been asking herself this question with increasing precision for approximately 6 weeks. She had arrived at an answer that was clear and slightly terrifying, as clear answers to important questions often are. Yes, she said. Eleanor absorbed this with professional equanimity. Then nothing happened and nothing is planned. You're maintaining a professional boundary out of respect for a complex situation. That's both true and legally defensible. Both of those things are accurate. Good. Eleanor made a note. Wear the gray suit, not the black. The black looks aggressive. The mediation took place in a conference room on the 33rd floor of a building downtown. Daniel was there with Webb and Audrey with Eleanor, and a mediator named Dr. Hartwell, who had the careful, neutral attention of someone paid to listen to people say difficult things without reacting to them. Daniel Callahan, 41, had been for 12 years the person who did the pigtails. He had kind eyes, and the exhausted quality of a man doing his best and knowing it wasn't enough. Audrey looked at him across the table and thought, I stopped seeing you. You stopped telling me. We both failed the same conversation. The proceeding was, as Eleanor had predicted, relatively straightforward. 3 additional weekends. 1 additional week in summer. A review mechanism at 18 months. Daniel's side raised the question of Anthony Reyes. Webb did it carefully, professionally, with a framing designed to introduce maximum discomfort with minimum legal exposure. Audrey answered, professional colleague, construction project manager. 2 meetings in professional contexts. April was not alone with him at any point. Her daughter's welfare was and had always been her primary consideration. All of this was true. The mediation ended. The paperwork would follow in a week. 3 additional weekends with his daughter. A man who loved April was going to get more time with her. That, underneath everything else, was a good outcome. She was putting on her coat in the corridor outside the conference room when Daniel appeared beside her. Webb was occupied with paperwork. Eleanor gave her a look and moved a diplomatic distance away. Audrey, Daniel said. Daniel. He had his hands in his pockets and the slightly rehearsed quality of someone who prepared a thing and is now unsure whether to say it. I'm sorry about the petition. The way it was a blunt instrument. It was, she said. I panicked. He looked at the floor. When Camille Reyes called me, she made it sound, I panicked. I know how that reads. I'm aware. Camille Reyes called you because she was frightened of the wrong thing, Audrey said. She made a mistake. You made a decision based on it. I would have preferred a phone call from you directly. He looked up. I know. I should have. A pause. He seems like a good man. From what Eleanor? He stopped. I'm not trying to. Another stop. He is a good man. Audrey said. Daniel looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a person recognizing something they knew was true, but had hoped might not be. You should be happy, he said. It cost him something. She could see it cost him something, and she respected him for saying it anyway. Thank you, she said. He nodded, put his coat on, walked back toward Webb and the paperwork. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Eleanor reappeared beside her. Go home, Eleanor said. It's over. It was not over. It was, in the precise sense, beginning. But she understood what Eleanor meant, and she went. She did not go directly home. She drove to the West Loop. The construction project had been complete for 13 days. The building stood finished and occupied. 40,000 square feet of it, lit from within against the January dark. She sat in her car on the street outside for a few minutes, looking at what had been built there. She thought about 12 recovered days and a tape measure at 6 in the morning, and a framing variance no one else had found. She thought, I'm about to do something that cannot be undone. She thought, good. She called him. He answered on the second ring. Audrey, are you home? Yes. Aurora's in bed. A brief pause. Is everything all right? The mediation was today. It went well. Daniel gets 3 additional weekends. I'm glad. And he was. She could hear it clearly. That straightforward, unperformative response that she had come to understand was simply how he occupied himself in the world. That's good for April. And for him. Yes. She looked at the building. I'm sitting outside the office. A pause. Why? I'm not sure exactly. She closed her eyes for a moment. I think I wanted to see what we built. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what does it look like? Like something that will last, she said. The silence on the line had a quality she had been noticing for weeks, and had finally stopped pretending she wasn't noticing. It was the silence of someone who is present, fully without agenda. Anthony, she said. Yes. I need to tell you something, and I want to say it correctly, which means I may say it badly, so I'm asking in advance for some patience. She heard him exhale. Not tension, something more like recognition. All right. I am your employer, she said carefully. That is a real thing, and it creates a real context, and I have thought about it seriously. I do not want to create a situation in which you feel obligated or pressured or unable to say no to something because of the power structure that exists between us. That matters to me. Your autonomy matters to me. Audrey, let me finish. She pressed on. Because this needed to be said completely, and she had been practicing it internally for 3 weeks. I am also someone who, over the course of 4 months, has come to regard you with a quality of attention that is not professional. That began on a sidewalk in November and has not stopped, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. A pause. Aurora and April have been drawing pictures of themselves as best friends for 3 months, and I think they may be onto something. Silence. What I am asking, she said, is whether you would like to have dinner with me. Not at Lakeview Grill. Somewhere without a history, somewhere new. A breath. Just the 2 of us, without any other context, so that we can understand what the context actually is, if there is one. The silence stretched, and she waited in it without trying to fill it, because she had learned that some silences were working and needed to be allowed to work. I called Camille, Anthony said finally. His voice was quiet and even and entirely itself. She had not expected this. When? 3 weeks ago. The day I told you I was going to. A pause. We talked for 2 hours. She cried. I cried. Aurora was on video call for the last 20 minutes and called Camille Auntie the entire time, which she had never done before but apparently had decided was correct. Another pause. She wants to meet April. Aurora wants to meet April or Camille? Both. She could hear him smile. They're somewhat similar in the way they decide things. Audrey closed her eyes. I would like to have dinner with you, Anthony said. I would like that very much. Somewhere new. Without any history. A brief pause. I should tell you something also. Yes? I knew on Monday. The 3rd Monday. When you walked through the door at 7:45 in sight boots that had been worn in and a hard hat with your name on the back, and you immediately asked where I was instead of announcing your presence to the room. He was quiet for a moment. I knew then. I've been waiting to understand what to do with that for 12 weeks. Audrey opened her eyes. The building stood in the January dark, lit from within. Friday, she said. Friday, he agreed. She sat in the car for a moment after they hung up. The city moved around her in its patient, indifferent way, and she thought about a night in November when she had walked out of a restaurant into the cold and held a door open, and how many things had passed through that door. Not just a man and his daughter, but the version of herself that was willing still to be surprised. She had been worth $300 million that night and crying in a restaurant bathroom. She drove home. April was awake, sitting up in bed with her drawing, the one with Aurora and the orange horse. "How come you're late?" April asked. "I had something to do, a good something." April considered this. "Is Aurora coming over soon?" "I think so." "Good." April lay back down and pulled the drawing to her chest. "We have more horses to draw." Audrey turned off the light and stood in the doorway the way she always did, watching her daughter settle into sleep. She thought, "I started this year crying in a bathroom over a marriage that had already ended." She thought, "I am ending it here, in a doorway, watching the person I love most dream about orange horses and best friends." She pulled the door half closed. She walked to the kitchen and stood at the window looking out at the city. She was going to build something new. She knew how to build things. She had been doing it her whole life. The difference this time was that she was not going to do it alone, and not going to do it the way she always had, by controlling every variable, by refusing to want anything she couldn't guarantee. She was going to do it the way April did, by pushing the crayon across the table. You can draw too if you want, without knowing what would be drawn. The city moved below her windows, patient and bright. She thought about Friday. She was not afraid.